My name is Evelyn Morgan, 60 years old, living in Rochester, New York. And up until 5:12 in the afternoon last Friday, I was still the internal operations director at Orion Systems, a major software technology company headquartered on the 38th floor of the Glassview Tower. I had worked there for 28 years, 11 months, and 27 days. Just 3 more days and I would have reached full pension eligibility, the award I had traded my entire youth for. But no, they cut it off as if I were the last useless piece on a chessboard they had just flipped over. An unscheduled meeting. No prior notice. No memo from HR. I was called to the office of the new CEO, Connor Fielding, who had only been in the role for 4 months. Tall, light brown hair, always wore a charcoal suit and a Rolex. The kind of man who could say the word efficiency 10 times in a 5-minute conversation. "Evelyn, thank you for coming." His voice was light, but his eyes were utterly blank. I sat down, trying to keep calm while my heart pounded like a war drum. On the desk was a thick ivory envelope. No recipient name, no note. Just an envelope. But I knew exactly what was inside. "We're implementing some urgent budget adjustments," he said, leaning forward. "And unfortunately, that means cutting a few long-standing roles. It's a difficult decision, but necessary for long-term growth." I stared at him, then glanced at the sleek black metal clock behind his head. 5:12 p.m., exact, cold as a scalpel. "Just 3 days from now I qualify for full pension, Connor." "I understand," he cut in, not blinking. "But the board has approved the decision. This is your severance package. Please review it. We need your signature by 5 o'clock tomorrow." I smirked but didn't smile. No, thank you for nearly 3 decades of service. No handshake, no respectful eye contact, just a document and a polished dismissal masked with templated phrasing. I stood up, took the envelope, and said in a low voice, "I'll look it over." "HR will escort you to collect your personal belongings," he added, tone unchanged. "And please keep everything professional." I didn't respond. I simply turned and walked out of the room, where my life's work had just been erased by a single emotionless sentence. My office was near the far corner of the 25th floor, the one with windows facing the Genesee River. Janet, a young HR staffer who'd joined just 2 months ago, was waiting, her face full of awkward sympathy. No one dared speak. Everyone knew something was deeply wrong. I opened the drawer, quietly placing a few items into a cardboard box. A photo of me with my late husband Daniel from our 1996 trip to Oregon, a ceramic mug that read "Boss Lady," and the crookedly hung plaque for 25 years of service. "I'm really sorry, Evelyn," Janet whispered, eyes red. "Don't be," I replied, still facing down. "You didn't do anything wrong." "But someone did. Very wrong." That evening, I skipped dinner. I made tea and sat in the reading room where my wall safe was hidden, something only Daniel and I had known about. 5 years ago, I began storing copies of irregular reports, suspicious emails tied to altered internal contracts. I had reported them many times, only to be rerouted through meaningless audits or told to let another department handle it. Once Connor Fielding took over, the corruption became blatant. Unexplained expenditures, budget reallocations with no supporting invoices, and maintenance reports with altered dates that were completely ignored. I'm not the kind to look away, but I'm not the type to scream out either. I documented, I stored, I waited for the right moment. And it seems that moment had arrived. The next morning, while checking through my files, the phone rang. The caller ID showed Russell Haynes, former CFO of Orion Systems, now a legal advisor for a federal office handling corporate fraud complaints. I tapped answer. "Russell, I need a meeting. Urgent." "What happened, Evelyn?" "I was fired 3 days before my full pension vests, and I have proof this isn't just about cutting budgets." There was silence for a few seconds. "Bring everything to my office Monday morning, and don't sign anything." I nodded, gripping the phone. "I never meant to use any of this, Russell. But they forced my hand." That afternoon, I opened the envelope Connor had handed me. 3-month salary, a strict clause requiring I not pursue any future claims against the company. No mention of pension, no continued health care, no recognition of service. Just a legal trap designed to silence me. I scoffed and set it beside 3 labeled boxes: irregular reports, internal contracts, forged signatures. I would not cry. We would not kneel. And I certainly would not disappear quietly. 3 days from now, instead of quietly retiring, I would walk into a battle. But this time, I would be the one holding the pieces. Evelyn Morgan, employee No. 3927, was no longer part of the company. But the woman who held the truth had only just begun to move. I never intended to become a whistleblower. I once believed that if I did the right thing, filed the proper reports, everything would be handled accordingly. But Orion Systems was no longer a place for honest people, not the place I once believed in. I began keeping documents 4 years ago, right after the suspicious audit in the second quarter of 2021. I remember that night vividly, sitting alone after hours, reviewing the revenue report for the product development department when I spotted something off. A contract worth $2,300,000 was marked as completed, but the client had only signed a letter of intent. No invoice, no actual transaction, yet the revenue had already been recorded. I reported it directly, no filters. First response? Probably a minor data entry error. Second, let finance double check. Third, nothing at all. Got the message, shut up. From that point on, I stopped sending any more reports. I backed up all documents, downloaded the related emails to my personal computer, and printed 2 sets, one stored in a safe and another in a secure deposit box at the bank. Every time I found an irregularity, whether it was a mismatched invoice date, a product report with a forged signature, or an internal email mentioning data adjustments as directed, I documented carefully and captured evidence. Connor Fielding didn't start this mess, but he was the one who took it to blatant extremes. Since he was appointed CEO, the frequency of data manipulations nearly doubled. Quarterly financial reports suddenly looked suspiciously healthy, while internally the budget was squeezed to the penny. At one point, they slashed the server maintenance budget, but spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on new testing equipment, which no one in engineering had ever seen. Then I began noticing the disappearance of emails I had sent. One email, warning of a suspicious $800,000 expense in the R&D allocation, suddenly vanished from the internal system. But I had the printout, I had the copy, I had the timestamp, and the recipient's name. I didn't stop. On the contrary, I began recording internal meetings, always under the pretext of note-taking and documentation. They couldn't object. In a meeting back in February last year, I still remember clearly, Steve Carver, the CFO at the time, said with a mocking tone when I questioned discrepancies in the early year spending report, "Evelyn, you need to understand this isn't the ledger of a corner store. We stay flexible to keep investor confidence intact." I looked him straight in the eye. "The flexibility you're talking about is turning black into white. If the shareholders knew the truth, their trust wouldn't just be bruised, it would be obliterated." I remember Steve smirking, just like every man who's used power to bury the truth. But I never forgot that look, the look of someone who knew he was wrong but believed no one dared to call him out. By the time I was terminated, I had compiled over 1,200 pages of documents, 16 recorded meetings, and 57 emails containing irregular content. Organized chronologically, some related to inflated contracts, others proved signature forgery used to approve orders. Most notably, I had retained an email thread between Connor and the legal department, in which he requested preparation of HR scenarios in case of retirement fund restructuring. That exactly 12 days before I was dismissed. The final line in that email chilled me to the bone. Process Evelyn Morgan before vesting date. Reason, financial balancing. He didn't say termination, didn't say downsizing, just one word: process. Cold, emotionless, as if I was just another number on a spreadsheet. On Sunday morning, I organized all records into 3 document sets, one sent to Russell's attorney, one sent to the Securities and Exchange Commission where Russell had arranged an official meeting for me, and one I sent to Orion's legal department via registered delivery with signature confirmation. I knew this move could no longer be ignored. That evening, Connor called. My personal number, something he'd never asked for during the past 4 months. "Yeah, Evelyn, I think we can sit down and talk. No need to escalate this." I set the phone on the table, turned on speaker, and answered slowly. "Connor, someone once told me honesty is a weakness in business. I disagree. Honesty is a weapon, and I've sharpened it enough to cut through any mask." I hung up, didn't wait for his response, because I already knew what was coming Monday. I was no longer an employee at Orion Systems. I was now the key witness in a federal financial fraud investigation, and they would not silence me with a settlement agreement. I sat still in my reading room, yellow light from the desk lamp casting over the numbered folders. The wall clock showed 9 p.m. I picked up my phone, scrolling through contacts like tracing an old memory. His name was still there, Brandon Keller. 15 years ago, Brandon was the chief financial officer at Orion Systems, before transferring to the SEC Northeast Division, specifically the Financial Enforcement Unit. A serious, straightforward man, and one of the very few who openly supported me when I resisted bypassing security protocols back in 2010. I took a deep breath and hit call. "Evelyn?" His voice came after 2 rings, deep, though no longer as sharp. Perhaps time had dulled him a little too. "Brendan, I need to see you. I can't wait any longer." A pause. "It happened?" "They fired me 3 days before my pension vested. And I have evidence this isn't just an internal issue. It's much bigger than that." He didn't ask further. "I have an office in Buffalo, but I'll be at headquarters in New York on Monday. Bring everything. And don't sign anything." His tone firmed. "We'll initiate the whistleblower process officially. I'll assign 2 investigators to attend." "You sure?" "Evelyn, if what you just said is true, Orion's reputation is the least of their concerns. This could be the biggest financial manipulation case I've seen in 10 years. I glanced at the boxes beside my desk, then closed my eyes. The feeling was part relief, part dread. "Do it, you Brandon." "No. Thank you for not staying silent like so many others." The call lasted nearly 2 hours. Brendan carefully guided me through every step of the whistleblower protection process under the Dodd-Frank Act, emphasizing that no document should leave my control, no identity should be disclosed, and that from this moment on, every move could be monitored or obstructed. "They'll try to call you, they'll make offers, maybe money, maybe a title like reinstatement, maybe even a formal apology. I won't bend." "Good. Be mentally prepared. After your filing, we'll have emergency intervention rights. Depending on the severity, the SEC might contact the company's legal team within 48 hours. I knew that, and I knew once the SEC stepped in, there would be no turning back. The next morning, I woke up with a single goal: prepare everything. I spent the entire morning organizing documents, creating a detailed index by quarter, by year, by violation type, from inflated revenue to manipulated quality reports to breaches in capital expenditure protocol. Each section included internal emails, note logs, photos of forged signatures, and cross-checked audit reports. Using my personal laser printer, I produced 2 full hard copy sets, each weighing nearly 11 pounds, not counting the encrypted USB with digital backups. One stayed in my home safe, one I carried to New York, and the last I sent by registered courier to the independent attorney Russell Haynes, recommended in case anything went wrong. I was no longer the woman keeping order in a corporate hallway. I was becoming the spark behind a federal investigation. By noon, my phone rang nonstop. Calls from human resources, then from Connor's personal assistant. I silenced everything and didn't pick up a single call. At 3:42 in the afternoon, an email popped up from the office of the CEO. "Evelyn, we sincerely apologize for the disruption in processing your benefits. We would like to meet with you at the office to clarify everything and discuss the possibility of reinstatement. We deeply value your contributions and want to ensure you are not subjected to any unfair treatment. I didn't reply. I simply saved the email, printed it out, and filed it under the folder labeled Post-Termination Manipulation. That evening, I stood in the living room looking out through the frosted glass. Snow was falling lightly, white crystals spiraling in the streetlights like thousands of silent whispers. The city moved on as usual, unaware that on the 38th floor of one glass tower, a financial scandal was about to be exposed. I pulled an old photo from its frame, a picture of me with Daniel in 1995, standing in front of the ocean in Cape Cod. He once told me I had the eyes of someone who sees what others overlook. Maybe that's why I could never look away. And tomorrow, I would use those eyes to look directly at the system that betrayed me and make it answer. I didn't expect them to panic so quickly. Early Saturday morning, before 9 o'clock, my home phone rang repeatedly. I didn't answer. After 3 missed calls from the HR office, I turned every device to silent mode, but not 15 minutes later, a text message appeared on my screen. Evelyn, we truly hope you will sign the agreement so this can be resolved peacefully. This is the best option for both parties. Lorraine, Director of Human Resources. I set the phone down on the kitchen table and didn't respond. Their desperation was starting to show, a frantic scramble disguised with polite wording. Less than an hour later, I received an email from Orion Systems' internal legal account. We request that you complete and return the agreement no later than 5 o'clock Sunday evening. If we receive no response, the company will reconsider the proposed terms, including the severance package. This time, I couldn't help but laugh. Threatening to withhold money, a cheap tactic they always assumed worked on aging employees approaching retirement. But I wasn't some trembling woman begging for mercy. I didn't rewrite, didn't respond, didn't even open the email. I continued organizing the documents, checking the encryption on the USB drive, labeling each section by year, quarter, and relevant department. It was Saturday. I had less than 48 hours to prepare for my meeting with the SEC. At 1:10 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. I hadn't scheduled anything. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Connor Fielding. He was standing right at my doorstep, left hand holding a folder, right hand in his coat pocket. His eyes cold, as if I owed him an apology. His deep blue suit looked completely out of place in the quiet neighborhood I'd lived in for 20 years. I didn't open the door. I stood there, silent. Connor stared into the peephole. His voice came through, not too loud, but clear enough for me to catch every word. Evelyn, I know you're in there. I didn't come to make this difficult. I just want to resolve this calmly. Neither of us needs to let this escalate. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Let him continue. You're a smart woman. You know what happens when people push too far, and I think you understand. This could all be settled if you're willing to sign the agreement. The severance package will be increased, you'll receive full medical benefits, and we'll make sure no one in the industry questions why you left. I nearly laughed out loud. No one questions it? Because they'd erase everything. Wipe my name from every accomplishment. Record me as just another voluntary resignation due to personal reasons, right? Connor stood a few more seconds. Hearing nothing, he placed the folder on the welcome mat, adjusted his collar, and said, quietly, "This is the final opportunity, Evelyn. After 5 o'clock tomorrow, the offer expires." He turned and walked back to the silver BMW parked across the street. I stayed behind the door until the sound of the engine faded. Then I opened it, bent down, and picked up the folder. No need to read it. I knew exactly what was inside. A trap, meticulously constructed with legal phrasing, wrapped in cash and the promise of silence. I tossed it onto the table, right on top of another folder twice as thick, Internal Manipulations 2020 to 2023. On Sunday morning, I received 3 more calls from HR, one from the company's chief legal officer and one from an unknown number I assumed was an external legal assistant. I didn't answer. They left voicemails. Voices tense, anxious, a mixture of fear and pleading. One part of a message made me pause. Miss Evelyn, under your employment contract, failure to respond may be considered non-cooperation, and the company may reassess your access to internal records. We advise you to consult independent legal counsel immediately. I stopped, smiled. They didn't know the documents I held were no longer internal, and I had an entire federal legal team waiting at the SEC office Monday morning. That Sunday evening, I called my daughter Rebecca, who lived in Boston. "I'm fine, don't worry," I said when I heard the concern in her voice. "Are you really not going back? I heard they might offer reinstatement, maybe even more benefits." "Rebecca, you don't know what they've done. And I'm not letting this get buried like every other time. But what if they come after you, try to ruin your name?" I cut her off. "I don't need their validation anymore. I only need the truth. And by tomorrow morning, that truth won't be locked behind conference room doors any longer." Rebecca was quiet for a few seconds, then said softly, "I'm proud of you, Mom." I stood in front of the mirror, pulled on my thick ash gray coat, buttoned it to the top. In my hand was a brown leather bag containing every document, sealed with a double zipper, secure and ready. Tomorrow I would walk into a federal building, no longer a terminated employee. I would be a witness. And for the first time in nearly 3 decades, they would no longer be able to ignore me. New York, Monday, 8:10 in the morning. I stepped into the lobby of the federal building at 225 Liberty Street, gripping my brown leather briefcase. The only thing that made me feel secure on a day when everything was about to turn irreversibly. Brandon Keller was already waiting in the glass lobby, his gaze as sharp as it had been when we last met 10 years ago. He wore a light gray suit, no tie, but carried the composure of a seasoned investigator who had peeled back the most polished numbers to reveal the rot beneath. "Evelyn, glad you made it." I nodded, tightening my grip on the strap. "I brought everything, not a single page missing." Brandon gave a small nod. He led me to a private elevator up to the 14th floor, where the SEC's Northeast Division Financial Enforcement Office was located. The glass doors opened into a cold space filled only with the sound of footsteps and rustling paper. No receptionist, no posters, just tension, strung tight like wire. Inside the compact conference room, 3 people were already waiting. Nina Shaw, Senior Investigative Counsel, Leo Yates, Financial Fraud Analyst, and Brandon, taking lead. "Miss Morgan," Nina began calmly, "thank you for reaching out. Before we begin, I must emphasize that everything discussed today is strictly confidential and protected under the Dodd-Frank whistleblower procedures." I nodded, unzipped the case, and placed each file on the table in order of year and severity. "What I've brought is not speculation. This is fact. It took me 4 years to collect. Every report, every email, every spreadsheet altered to dodge audit." Leo Lee Hates began flipping through the pages, his expression shifting as he scanned the handwritten annotations in the margins. One note read, "Revenue figures increased by 13%, not matching ERP data." Another I'd marked in red, "This signature does not belong to Audit Director. Compare with authentic signature from 2020 records." I spoke for nearly 3 hours, no interruptions, no crosstalk. The room held only the sound of my voice, pages turning and Nina's keyboard clicking steadily. When I finished presenting the report about the Research Investment Fund, $4.8 million routed through 3 shell subsidiaries and returned as internal bonuses, Nina leaned back in her chair, eyes steady on mine. Morgan, this is one of the most complete and detailed whistleblower submissions we've ever received." Brandon nodded. "This is not just internal fraud. This appears to be deliberate corporate value manipulation, which falls squarely under federal criminal jurisdiction." I didn't feel pride, only weight, because I knew exactly what I had placed on that table would dismantle a system I once helped uphold. "We'll initiate the investigation today," Nina said, "starting with immediate contact to Orion Systems' legal department under emergency protocol." I left the building at 12:14 in the afternoon, emotions churning. The investigation was officially underway. Brought to bear 5:36 in the evening. I was boiling water when the phone rang. Evelyn? The voice was rushed. What did you do? It was Lorraine, head of human resources. I did the right thing, I replied, eyes still on the kettle. The SEC called. The entire legal office is in panic. The CEO's system access has been revoked. The board called an emergency meeting. The company is in chaos. I let the silence sit for a moment, then quietly said, You should have listened to me 4 years ago. Evelyn, this could ruin everything. Then blame the ones who built it on sand, not me. I hung up. My heart was racing, but I felt no regret. 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. Unknown number. Argan, this is Patrick Vares, Orion's media liaison. We'd like to meet before this gets any bigger. I chuckled. You should prepare a press release, because this is just the beginning. Tuesday morning, financial media begins publishing. Orion Systems faces SEC investigation over suspected financial reporting and internal spending manipulation. Sources say at least 3 board members have had their access credentials revoked. I received an email from Brandon at 9:42 a.m. The Sexus issued a formal document request to Orion's legal office. We'll provide further updates. Do not engage directly with any company representative. I understood. The battle had entered the public stage. I was no longer a discarded employee. I was now a key witness in a federal investigation against a publicly traded company, and from that moment forward, everything changed. Thursday, 6:45 in the morning, Rochester. I woke in the gray light of early dawn, still unaccustomed to the feeling of not rushing off to work. But this morning was different. My phone flashed constantly, flooded with news alerts from major financial outlets. Orion Systems confirms firing of CEO Connor Fielding due to serious violations. 4 board members resign following emergency notice from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Orion Systems stock plummets 30% over 2 consecutive sessions. Markets stunned. I sat up straight. No coffee, no cold water to the face. That headline alone was enough to jolt me fully awake. Connor Fielding, the man who tossed me aside like garbage, had been suspended just 3 days into preliminary investigation. Now he was officially terminated. No defense, no flattering lines about executive contributions, just 3 cold, final words in the company press release. 4. I walked to the kitchen, turned on the kettle, and opened my laptop. On Orion's homepage, the executive leadership section had already been updated. Patricia Donovan, former chief operations officer, now listed as interim CEO, a sharp, quiet leader, and most importantly, someone who never once looked down on me. Just as I was scanning the headlines, the landline rang. Internal number from Orion headquarters. I hesitated a few seconds, then picked up the receiver. Evelyn Morgan, a deep, courteous male voice said. This is Charles Whitaker, the new chief legal officer at Orion Systems. We would like to arrange an official meeting tomorrow at our Syracuse branch office with the presence of the interim CEO and outside legal counsel. I remained silent. He continued, his tone more cautious. The meeting is intended to restore all disruptive benefits, including pension, healthcare support, and to review appropriate corrective actions regarding the wrongdoing done to you. Said I, replied coldly. I'll be there, but I'm not coming to hear apologies. We completely understand, he said. Friday, 9 o'clock in the morning, Syracuse. Conference room on the 12th floor. Still the same long walnut table, the same black leather chairs. But this time, I wasn't the one sitting at the edge. Patricia stood up as I entered. No assistant, no dismissive glances, only seriousness and caution. Evelyn, thank you for coming. Before we begin, I want to make one thing clear. What happened to you was wrong, indisputably, and we don't intend to avoid that. I didn't nod, didn't smile. I simply sat down, opened my file folder, showing them I was prepared in case they tried to spin the truth. Charles, the chief legal officer, handed me a printed document. No clips, no seals, like before. He spoke plainly. This is the official letter reversing your termination, reinstating your full retirement benefits, including tenure, lifelong health care, and an honorary compensation package equal to 5 years of base salary. Additionally, the company proposes appointing you as a senior advisor to the newly formed Ethics and Compliance Board, should you agree. I didn't respond right away. I looked at Patricia. Where's Connor? Terminated. No severance. His file has been forwarded to private legal counsel due to the risk of criminal prosecution. All 4 board members resigned before the SEC issue its subpoenas. I turned to Charles. So, it's all over? No. He shook his head. It's just beginning. The SEC has escalated the case to the federal enforcement team, and they won't stop at the company level. Individual subpoenas may follow in the next few weeks. But with what you've provided, they believe they can trace the entire fraud network that's been running nearly 7 years. I closed the folder, lightly but decisively. I won't sign anything today. I need time. I'm in no rush. After more than 28 years of work, I know the value of a single signature. Patricia nodded. We understand. And thank you for not turning your back on the truth. Friday evening, 6:30, Rochester. I sat in my home office, yellow light casting across old photographs. Rebecca called on FaceTime, her 2 kids fighting over popcorn in the background. You're in the big news. They're calling you the whistleblower from within. I smiled faintly. I don't care about titles. I care about the truth. Rebecca looked at me, eyes shining. I've never seen anyone take on an entire system like you did. I'm proud to be your daughter. I looked out the window. The sky was darkening. Snow hadn't fallen, but the stillness whispered that the storm wasn't over. I thought to myself, this wasn't the end. It was simply the next front, one where justice no longer belonged to suits behind closed doors. This time, everything would unfold in the light. Rochester. 1 week after the meeting with Patricia Donovan, I stood in front of the wall, safe in my reading room, hands slightly trembling for the first time in years. During all my time at Orion Systems, I had saved anything that gave me pause. Puzzle pieces, not quite enough to indict, but far too blatant to ignore. Back then, I wasn't sure what would happen, but I knew one day I would need them. That day had come. I pulled out each folder, sealed in plastic sleeves, clearly labeled Internal Memos 2014 to 2016, Investment Fund Transfers 2017, Untraceable Spending Approvals 2018. At the bottom was a thick envelope marked in red ink, handwritten notes from Audit Confidential. I had never submitted this to the company's system. I knew if I did, it would vanish. This evidence wasn't about Connor Fielding. It went far beyond him. The files included emails from Lawrence Dayton, former vice president of finance, retired in 2018, rumored to have orchestrated questionable budget adjustments in strategic projects, along with that a doctored financial comparison sheet bearing the unusual signature of Jeffrey Holt, a former board member now working at a major investment fund. And finally, a handwritten exchange between 2 former directors discussing how to clean up numbers to protect valuation before Phase 2 IPO expansion. These weren't accounting mistakes. They were evidence of a premeditated fraud scheme dating back to at least 2015. I called Brandon Keller that night. Brandon, I found something. It's worse than we thought. How bad? This started before Connor even arrived, and at least 2 board members knew, possibly more. 2 days later, SEC headquarters, New York. The atmosphere in the conference room was no longer calm. Urgency filled the air. Brandon stood beside Nina Shaw, both visibly tense. Evelyn, Nina began, the additional documents you provided have opened a completely new direction. There is no doubt now these violations are systemic and span nearly a decade. Brandon flipped through the file and slid a summary sheet toward me. At least 3 individuals beyond Connor showed direct involvement. Lawrence Dayton, Jeffrey Holt, and Douglas Pierce, the former head of internal audit. All 3 approved unauthorized expenditures, falsified report dates, and enabled illegal funds to circulate through shell companies. I exhaled deeply, not out of surprise, out of confirmation. We suspected it, now we have proof. 3 weeks later, Federal Court, Southern District of New York. I sat in the third row, behind the attorneys and federal investigators. In the witness dock stood Connor Fielding, Lawrence Deaton, and Jeffrey Holt, heads bowed before the judge, dressed in suits but looking drained and hollowed of their former power. I used to think this moment would bring me satisfaction, but it didn't. It brought only a strange quietness inside, like a symphony that ended not in applause, but in silence. The judge read the indictment. The defendants have violated Rule 10b-5 of the Securities Exchange Act, falsifying documents to mislead shareholders and investors. The guilty pleas are recorded and sentencing terms will be announced in the next hearing. 3 once powerful men lowered their heads and admitted their guilt. No excuses. No blame shifting. When Connor turned to look around the courtroom, his eyes passed over me. There was no hatred, no fear, only recognition that he could not stop what happens when someone chooses to bring the truth into the light. CC office, 1 week after the trial. Brandon invited me back, this time not to submit more documents, but for an investigation update. Evelyn, he said, pulling out my chair, you did what many wouldn't. Not just because of fear, but because they believed too much in the system. I looked at him and said quietly, I used to believe, but now I believe in action and consequences. Exactly, Brandon nodded. The investigation will continue. There are signs of a cross-industry fraud network, with some Orion board members having stake in related companies. But the breakthrough came from you, and thanks to you, we can now trace every link in the chain. I nodded. I didn't feel triumphant, just at peace. I just couldn't pretend I didn't see it anymore. That evening by Lake Ontario, I sat in a wooden chair by the shore, sunset light glinting across the calm waves in orange, gold, and silver. Rebecca sat beside me, holding a mug of hot cocoa. What do you think people will say when they find out you cracked the biggest case in Orion's history? I sipped the cocoa, smiling faintly. I don't care what they call me. I just care that the truth was finally heard. She stayed quiet for a few seconds, then gently took my hand. I'm proud you didn't stay silent. Thank you for showing me that justice doesn't need permission to exist. I squeezed her hand, eyes on the lake. The wind picked up, but I didn't feel cold. 3 months after the trial, Lake Ontario, New York. I sat beneath the porch of the newly built cabin, a cup of hot tea resting on a marble table. Before me stretched the vast lake, its surface shimmering in the early morning light like fractured glass. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about work or the case that had come to a close. I simply watched my 2 grandchildren chase each other through the yard, their laughter echoing across the small piece of land I now called my final home. I had turned down the invitation to return to Orion Systems, though Patricia Donovan had earnestly offered me a leadership role in the company's ethics and compliance department. I knew my heart no longer belonged there. That company betrayed me, and no amount of money could buy back my dignity. Instead, I accepted the SEC's invitation to serve as an independent advisor, helping build a new initiative called ClearPath, a whistleblower system with full protection, designed so that ordinary employees could speak up without fear of retaliation. At a conference room in the SEC headquarters in Washington, D.C., I made my stance clear. The current whistleblower systems are riddled with loopholes. Those who speak up are often vilified, while those who deceive are praised for saving the company. If we don't rebuild this from the ground up, no one will speak the truth. They fell silent, then all nodded. We need voices like yours, Evelyn, not just for your experience, but your courage. I didn't feel courageous. I only felt I could no longer stay deaf to the filth embedded in the system. And if even a part of my effort could help others avoid the weight I once carried, then I was ready. A month later, I received official notice from the SEC. My whistleblower award had been approved. Because the penalty imposed on Orion Systems exceeded the threshold, I received 15%, a figure that would make anyone's head spin. I didn't spend lavishly. I didn't buy a new car, jewelry, or travel the world. Instead, I established the Daniel Morgan Scholarship Fund, named after my late husband, who had always believed in my integrity, even when my perfectionism drove him mad. You really can let a single wrong invoice slide, can you, Evelyn? Daniel once teased me over dinner. Now, that meticulousness had become an opportunity for the next generation. The fund focuses on supporting students in accounting, auditing, and corporate ethics, future defenders of transparency. The scholarship's launch was held at Syracuse University. Rebecca stood beside me on stage, her hand gripping mine tightly as I addressed hundreds of students. Integrity isn't a gift, it's a choice. The choice to stand even knowing you might lose everything. The only reason I didn't fall was because I knew I wasn't lying to myself. The entire hall rose in applause. But I only looked at Rebecca and saw in her eyes what I had longed for all my life, understanding and pride. That evening, as we gathered around the dinner table, my grandchildren excitedly shared stories from school. Suddenly, Rebecca asked, "Do you regret it, not staying silent?" I set my knife down and thought for a few seconds. Yes, I regret not speaking up sooner. I regret believing the system would fix itself. But I never regret choosing to tell the truth. She nodded and smiled softly. Then I won't stay silent either if ever I have to choose. I looked at my daughter, a woman who once wrestled between ideals and social pressure, now speaking with a calm conviction I had never seen before. I understood then. My legacy wasn't in the money, the titles, or the award from the SEC. It was in that lesson, passed over family dinner, reflected in my daughter's eyes, embedded in a future I helped protect from those who twist ethics into a tool for power. Every morning, I still make tea, still sit on the porch, and still read the financial pages out of old habit, but I no longer feel like an outsider. I know I've made a difference, a small one, but real. Orion's system still exists, but as a different version, more transparent, more accountable. And in every one of their reports, I know a piece of my voice is there, ringing like a bell in boardrooms once silenced by fear. As for me, I live each day fully, never again lowering my head for anyone. Because I am Evelyn Morgan, and I chose the truth, even when it cost me everything. Evelyn Morgan's story is a powerful testament that integrity is not weakness, it is true strength. In a world where silence is often rewarded and truth punished, Evelyn chose to stand, not for gain, but for principle. She didn't just expose wrongdoing, she paved the way for others to believe that justice may be delayed, but it can never be buried. Her courage leaves behind a legacy far greater than numbers. It is the enduring belief in truth. What did you think about Evelyn's courageous journey? Would you be strong enough to stand up for the truth like she did? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more emotional stories about life and family.